You want to make sure nothing is making contact with the board right there. It's clearly marked, and they gave us that warning piece of literature as well. So now let's go ahead, let's get this board installed. Hey everyone, Digital David here. Today on this episode of Newegg Now, I'm going to be checking out the MSI B550-A Pro motherboard. I did purchase this product myself, and any opinion expressed in this video is strictly my own. That being said, if you're interested in this product, you want to find out more about it, the link to it will be in my video description below. Now let's go ahead, let's check this motherboard out. Let's look at the box in more detail and learn more about its key features. Here's the box up close with some key information on the front. This is AMD Ryzen 5000 desktop ready. You can see a sticker's been added onto the box. Printed on the box, you can see it supports 3rd gen Ryzen desktop processors, but not compatible with the Ryzen 5 3400G and the Ryzen 3 3200G processors. PCIe 4.0 ready with graphics and NVMe only. We can flip it over to the back side where we can learn more about this product and its key tech specs right here. AM4 socket, B550 chipset, one PCIe 4.0 X16 slot, and you can see we have our one PCIe 3.0 X16 slot. DisplayPort HDMI, 4 DIMMs. You can see dual channel DDR4, our PCIe slots right there. You can see it from the image as well. USB ports, you can see the nice breakdown. 2 USB 3.2 Gen 2s, 5 USB 3.2 Gen 1s, and then it says 8 USB 2.0. Gigabit LAN, you can see a nice breakdown right here of our I/O. And then some core features they're advertising right here: Core Boost, Gen 4, AMD Turbo USB with the USB 3.2 Gen 2s. Then our front USB Type-C, extended heatsink design. We have our M.2 shield as well, airflow optimized and DIY friendly. Now let's go ahead, let's open it up and look at the package contents. Here are all the package contents. First up, you can see we have a reward program advertisement followed by a thank you card and our MSI sticker label right there. Next, you can see we have a DVD with the motherboard drivers and utility information on it. We have a case standoff notification. Make sure to read this and reference it so you keep out of the case standoff keep out zones. Then you can see we have a quick start guide right here for Intel and AMD builds, walking us through other key components of installation like the memory and our front panel connectors. Then we can see the backside, same thing. We have our I/O plate. Make sure you install the I/O plate on the motherboard in your case before you finish getting everything installed and tightened down. You want to put that on first before you forget. That's your friendly reminder. Then we have our power supply, our drives, graphics card, peripheral devices, powering it on, and software updates as needed. Next, you can see a couple different cables for us to use. We have that I/O panel cover, so make sure you put that on before you get too far into your build and forget about it and have to take stuff back out. And then we have some screws for the M.2 drives. We got 3 screws right there. And last but not least, we have the motherboard itself. Let's go ahead, let's look at that in more detail. So here we go, here's the motherboard. You can see where our AMD processor is gonna go. We have our 4 DIMM slots right there, our M.2 drive with our heatsink shield right there, our one PCIe 4.0 lane. You can see our other PCIe slots right there. Check that out. Some of the main things I want to show you. Ooh, it's pokey, very pokey. We have our USB Type-C front panel connector right there. Here's our USB 3.0 right there. So you can see everything looks great. Here's our SATA ports on that side. Keep in mind they're going to share some bandwidth, I believe, with this other M.2. So we have 2 M.2 drive slots for us, which is cool. And then here's our I/O. You can check it out. We have our BIOS flash back button, USB 2.0 ports. Then we have our 3.0 ports, gigabit LAN, and we have our USB Type-C and our USB 3.2 Gen 2 right there. And then our audio options. Then we can flip it over. Here's the back side as well too, if you want to see that. There's the back side of this board. And they clearly mark and label for you the case standoff keep out zones, okay? So make sure on your case, when you go to just do a dry fit, that there's no standoffs right there. You want to make sure nothing is making contact with the board right there. It's clearly marked, and they gave us that warning piece of literature as well. So now let's go ahead, let's get this board installed. So to install the M.2 drive, you can see we have two screws right here we got to remove for our heatsink. So go ahead, take a Phillips head screwdriver and remove the screws as needed. There we go. Pay attention because we have two different sizes right there when you put them back on. But check that out. You can see that right there. We'll have to peel that before use. And now we're ready to take our drive and install it in place. Keep in mind at this stage, you may need to adjust this depending on the size of your M.2 drive. In our case, it just so happens to be the perfect one by default. And now we're ready to take one of the three included screws with our motherboard and fasten it down in place. So let's see. Got one out right here. Going to use our Phillips head screwdriver again. And just gently line everything up and tighten in place. And there we go. We're ready now to take our bracket. Let's make sure we have it lined up the right way. And then we're just going to drop it in. And it's going to be all set and ready to go for us. So let's go ahead. Let's peel that off. Now let's line everything back up. And we'll just drop it right in. So let's take our screw. We're going to tighten everything down, and then we'll come back with this guy. Make sure everything's lined up properly. And then we'll just tighten it down in place. Nice and snug. So there we go. We just successfully installed our M.2 drive. If for some reason you have another drive and you're using this exact same board, then you're going to install the second M.2 drive right here. When installing the RAM, refer to the user guide and manual, and you might be able to find it directly on your motherboard as well. If you're going to just be using 2 out of the 4 available slots, it will tell you which 2 slots to use. So in our case, you can see it's clearly marked A2 and B2 are the ones we're supposed to use first. So here's A1, here's A2, here's B1, and here's B2. So we're going to be using A2 and B2 for our 2 sticks of RAM. Obviously, if you had 4 sticks of RAM, you will be using all 4 slots. So let's go ahead. Let's take one of our sticks right here. Let's just gently line everything up. It's only going to fit one way. So just keep that in mind if you're doing this for the first time. Maybe you can see right here, we have a longer side and a shorter side. So then just line it up and then just gently press everything in place, and then you hear it click. And now let's do that again for our second stick. So same thing, it's only going to go one way. Drop it in and then just gently press. And there we go, it snaps in place, and now the RAM has successfully been installed. The first step for installing our CPU is to go ahead and remove the included brackets right here. We're not going to need that for our cooler. We are going to keep the bracket on the back though and use that with the current one that we have that came with our CPU. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to take our Phillips head screwdriver and we're going to remove these 4 screws. So you can see we got those 2 brackets removed. Now we can go ahead, let's install the CPU at this point. You could have done that first and then remove the brackets. It's really up to you and your preference. So you can see our brand new Ryzen 5 5600X right here. Pay attention on the processor. You'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, we got a little golden triangle. So that's going to match up the triangle that you see on the board up here. If you're looking at it, bird's eye view from the camera up top, the top left-hand corner. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to open that up and we're going to line it right there. There's also a Pac-Man looking logo on the side too. You can line it up with that one. So just gently, you line everything up and it drops into place like so. And then we just gently push that lever back down and there we go. We just installed our CPU on the motherboard. Now the next step for us is to install our heatsink. If you're going to use the one right out of the box, you can see we already have pre-applied thermal paste straight from the factory, so there's nothing we need to do here. Now you may notice, you may not notice, I went ahead, I moved my fan around so the logo is actually going to be facing this way, so kind of centered. It was going to be facing this way, how it was initially installed. Now for me, the only issue is now since I moved the fan, it's harder to get the screwdriver here, but I don't think I'm going to have any issues getting everything installed. And I wanted to do that to try out and see if that'll help the cable management a little bit too, because now I can tuck everything in there as we connect it. So we're ready to line the 4 screws up and tighten everything down. So there we go, everything's been installed. It's only gonna allow you to tighten to a certain point, so don't force it any further beyond that. And that's it, guys. We have the CPU and our cooler installed on our motherboard. Now we're ready to install our I/O shield. Just to make sure everything's lined up, you can see we can kind of just roughly fit it in place right here. Keep in mind, some of those top brackets might need to be bent a little bit to ensure that they go over the top of your ports, and then everything else should rest and make contact on the ports themselves, not in the ports, just on the ports. So we're ready now to fit this into our case. Also at this stage, depending on the style and type of motherboard you bought, it may already have this pre-installed. In that case, then you'll just work it through with the whole motherboard as you set it in the case. But in our case, we kind of have to finagle it a little bit, and then it should theoretically snap in place. So we just snapped some of the top in. Let's see if we can snap the bottom in as well. It'll depend on the case quality as well too. So we'll see if we can push the bottom in, but it should snap in. There we go. It should snap right in, and now we're ready. So when we put the motherboard in, it will all line up. But keep in mind, you will need to push this in place so it's got that nice fit, and you should hear it actually make a couple of snap noises too as it fits securely in place. So to get the motherboard installed, we're going to line it up and just gently angle it in and slowly work it in place, making sure that we have the I/O cover set up and everything lined up, and then just gently make sure it's resting comfortably on the standoff brackets. And I'm peeking at the side to confirm that nothing's being blocked or covered with it. Everything looks great. Our I/O cover is perfectly snapped out as it should be, and everything is resting comfortably. Again, it's all on the standoff brackets. So now we're ready to go ahead and fasten it down with the included screws. So out of all the included screws for our NZX T case, we're going to be using 8 of the 6/32 5mm screw flats. You can see the bag right here, how they're clearly labeled for us. And we have 8 different holes. We have to fasten them in place on our motherboard. So there we go. You can see all 8 screws are tightened down. And now we can go ahead, we can stand everything up, and you can see the motherboard is firmly in place. Now let me go ahead, let's just show you it from the back side of the case too, so you can see everything is attached, and we have our bracket there for the cooler and CPU as well. All right, so I should have the cables lined up for us from the back that we're ready to attach. So first, let's start with our HD audio. You may be able to see this, you may not. It has one square solid, so it only goes one way when we connect it, and we're connecting it to the JAUD1. So that's our audio for this one. So it only goes one way. Line everything up and gently press it down. Next, you can see we got our big boy right here. This is our USB 3.0. This also only goes one way. Pay attention to that little lip at the top. So we can go ahead. This one's always really tough if you ever have to unplug it. This one always gives me the most trouble, but it just snapped right in there. Next, we have, what do we got here? We got our F panel, and we have our spot on the board. It's JFP1. Again, all this information is in the motherboard user guided manual. This also only goes one way. We have one solid square. So make sure you line it up properly and just gently press everything in place. So there we go. We got that one in. Kind of work on tucking in the cables later. We have a couple more options here. So here is our USB Type-C for the front. This one always gets me too. So just very gently line it up, and it should go in. This one wants to go in that way. So there we go. That's going to our USB 4 right there. That's the only one on the board here. We should have another fan cable option down here hiding. Here it is. So here's one of our 2 fans. We're going to plug that one in here. So this is system fan 3. Also only goes one way. So just pay attention to those pins and how it drops in. So line everything up and just gently press in place. And then you can see up top we have our CPU fan and cooler. So that's going to go right with the CPU fan 1. And that's why I moved this. So this cable I could tuck back in there. I kind of thought of that ahead of time, which is always nice. And same thing, it just lines up and then very gently press it in place. Trying to keep my big head out of the way for you guys. Gently press it in place. Now I can work on tucking that further behind. So if I go ahead and flip it over, we should only have one more cable to work with at this point to connect to the board. And you can see it's our second fan cable right here. So you can see I rerouted the fan cable from right here. I brought it around this way and we looped it back. And now we can flip it over and you can see where we have it connected on our board. But there we go, we have it connected right there now. So with that being said, you can see we have everything connected, all set and ready to go. So we got our front panels, everything's connected, and we also went ahead and we attached our CPU fan as well to the motherboard. First up, we're looking at CPU-Z, so check it out here. Feel free to pause your screen as I browse the different tabs if there's anything you want to look at in more detail. But you can see we got the Ryzen 5 5600X. Here's our motherboard settings. Then you can see our memory, SPD, graphics. Again, we have our RTX 3060. Here's our bench results. So you can see that for the single thread and multi-thread scores. And then we have the about section of the app. Now let's go on and let's look at our SSD benchmarks. So you can see our real world benchmarking results right here from two different programs to get you guys a rough range of what you can expect with this drive versus what's advertised versus what you'll actually see in day-to-day use. So first up, we have Crystal Diskmark showing us a read score of 3476 megabytes per second and a write score of 2383 megabytes per second. ASSSD is showing us a read score of 3052 megabytes per second and a write score of 2263. Samsung will advertise this drive having read speeds up to 3500 megabytes per second, so we got really close to that number with Crystal Diskmark, but they advertise write speeds up to 3300 megabytes per second, and you can see clearly we fell short of that mark. Now you can see our Geekbench 5 results. So we got a single core score of 1653 and a multi-core score of 8133. Let's browse a little bit further down. You can see our system info again. We have our memory info. And now we have a breakdown of that single core performance. So let's go ahead and let's just slowly browse that. You can see everything right here for the single core score and the different results, and compare it to your machine if you desire. Next, we have our multi-core score breakdown. Again, 8133 for the score. You can see the nice breakdown right there. A lot of tests run with Geekbench. And there's the rest of our multi-core score using Geekbench 5 for our benchmark. Now you can see our Cinebench R23 scores right here. First up, we have a multi-core score of 1045.7 and a single core score of 1508. Here's our build specs again. Here's the multi-core score breakdown. We're number 4 on this list of comparison devices. Pretty wide variety and range, though, if you see some of the core counts, threads, makes, and model. Definitely a price discrepancy in these tests. But you can see how it stacks up for some of those options. Now let's look at the same results for our single core. There we go. We're number 2 right here. You can see how it stacks up. Really cool that we have that comparison right here at our fingertips to see 12 different devices and how it compares. Now we're taking a look at the MSI Center. I downloaded this for our motherboard so we could get access to the hardware monitoring, but you can see there's other installable items depending on your usage scenarios. Mystic Light, if you want to control lighting effects on your MSI RGB devices, you can download that right here from the MSI Center. But in our case, let's look at the hardware monitor right here. We can see our CPU usage, CPU frequency, and we have our core temp and socket temp right here. Under a full load, like when I was benchmarking, I was looking at this, monitoring it periodically. Didn't really get any higher than around 80 degrees Celsius at 100% CPU usage. I thought that was pretty good thermal wise, considering the fact that we only have 2 fans with this case, and then obviously the CPU cooler and the 3 fan setup for our GPU. But we can monitor all of that right here, and you can see our fan. And we have a free up memory option, and then you can see some of our additional resources and hardware that we're able to monitor right here from the nice MSI Center software. Now I wanted to show you guys the motherboard BIOS settings. So currently we're in easy mode where we can just browse the CPU. You can see our memory right here, and you can see the frequency that we're at, 3200 megahertz. That is the speed it's advertised for. By default, you will have to change this in your motherboard settings to get to that speed. It's very simple. Next, you can see we have our storage. Here's our fan info. So I'm showing you guys what we're working with right there. Then we have a help section, so you can learn more about some of the different controls. And then we have our flash option. We don't want to do that right now, so let's exit out of that. We have a favorite section, and we have a hardware monitor right here. So you can really dive in and monitor the hardware and what you're working with depending on what you have connected. So pretty cool, right? We're just going to keep clicking through these really quickly for you guys, so you can get a feel for the different settings, different options. All right, and let's go back out. Now I'll show you guys, we have the advanced mode. Let's go up there. And then you can see we have our settings, system status, so a lot of different options there. We have the advanced section. And then you can see the different options here. We'll go back. Here's the boot. You can see the boot sequence option, and we can configure that. Security options. And obviously we can save and exit. Next, we have the OC. So here we go. If we want to do some overclocking, you can. This is where we changed our RAM speed. So make sure you enable this. Select the correct profile you want. And then you can select the frequency from this massive list, depending on the RAM that you got. Let's go all the way down so you can see the different options that we have there. It's pretty cool. So if you want to dabble in this, that's where you're going to be able to do a lot of your overclocking. And then we got the M Flash settings again. And then if we want to, we can always go back to easy mode as well. So very simple. The BIOS is actually pretty easy to navigate. You should be able to find the features that you want. It could be a little bit overwhelming as you start to dabble in PC building, but I think overall having the advanced and easy mode makes this great. So if you're just trying to do some simple changes like I did in this build, just changing the RAM speed, you'll be able to do that very easily without getting overwhelmed or lost in the process. But if you want to really geek out and nerd out and go to town with overclocking, you have the capabilities within the BIOS settings. And I want to point out for this build, our 5000 series processor worked right away, right out of the box without having to do any sort of BIOS updates, flashbacks, or anything along those lines. So let me share with you my final thoughts in regards to this motherboard. Very easy and simple experience getting everything installed. What's great is it worked right out of the box with Ryzen 5000 series processor, so I didn't have to flash back the BIOS or anything else. But I bought this motherboard because one, I wasn't sure if that was going to be the case, and this does have your BIOS flash button. Two, I wanted one that had USB Type-C on it so I could use this case to use the front I/O USB Type-C. And three, I wanted something that had PCIe 4.0, and we have that lane for our GPU and the M.2 drive, even though I know I didn't use a Gen 4 SSD yet, but that is why I wanted to get a board like this that was also very budget friendly. And this seemed to be one of the cheapest options that was still popular online today. And I've used MSI motherboards in the past, so I felt comfortable with it for this build. And so far, everything's worked great. I think my biggest pet peeve is still the cheap I/O shield on the back. That really bothers me for some reason. I just wish they were all integrated directly on the motherboard, but you definitely get what you pay for. They have a couple other options that are a couple dollars more that have a lot, if not all of the same features. But again, it's just kind of what do you want to spend, you know, a little bit higher quality board, maybe a little bit easier to assemble and put together, or do you want to save a couple of bucks? So you got to figure out where you stand on that, but just make sure it has all the key features that you're looking for and that it's going to be compatible with your case. Well, that concludes our video. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget the product link will be in our video description below. Please go ahead, check it out, and do your shopping from there. Any purchase made through that link helps support our channel at no additional cost to you. So we're really grateful and thankful for all of your support. While you're at it, can you go ahead and hit that like button for us? And subscribe to our channel. We have new content coming out daily, and we don't want you to miss anything. Please go ahead and give us a follow online and make it a clean sweep. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, TikTok, Discord. You can message us on WeChat, check out our website, and join our free newsletter. Thank you guys so much for being here. Don't forget, new content daily, and we can't wait to see you in our next video.